So, and welcome to another ICTS virtual string seminar. We are happy to have Akhil from ICTS with us today, and he's going to talk about gravitational probes with memory. Okay, over to you, Akhil.
Okay, thank you, Vishal. So let me again start by repeating the title. It's gravitational probes with memory, and it's a work done in collaboration with Jewel, Loganayagam, Siddharth, Mukund, and Vishal. So is this next slide visible?
Yes.
Thanks. Uh, so let me start with a quick overview of the talk. So I'll start with some motivation and try to explain what we mean by the title, which is, and what we mean by open props with memory. So then I will try to explain Schwinger-Keldysh path integrals, and I will give two perspectives for the Schwinger-Keldysh path integrals from either side of the ADS-CFT duality. And then we will talk about how the how to identify the relevant degrees of freedom in the some low energy effective description we are looking for, and then we will conclude. Uh, so so studying the long distance behavior of the holographic CFT is what we're trying to do, and and generically you would expect that there should be a hydrodynamic behavior which emerges over long scales, where the where the main players in the dynamics are all conserved charges and conserved currents, stress tensor, and long-lived modes like quasi-particles, cold stones, and so on. Uh, but it's not the case that the microscopic fluctuations which we kind of integrate out uh, while arriving at this hydrodynamic behavior do not play any role at all. It, 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 it should be thought that these guys would affect the fluid hydrodynamic modes by stochastically driving them uh, and creating a noisy force in their evolution. So this can be compared to what the situation where you think of a Newton's equation with where a particle moves with just a Stokes drag kind of force, and then you have to, uh, but there are microscopic fluctuations which lift this Newton's equation to a full Langevin equation for a Brownian motion, and so that's the kind of description we want to have for hydrodynamics, and you so such a description of hydrodynamics is called fluctuating hydrodynamics. So so there's a lot of stuff which has been said about fluctuating hydrodynamics from a purely field theory side, based on what should be the structure of their not local, low energy effective action and so on. But we lack a microscopic derivation, say in the style of what fluid gravity correspondence did for dissipative hydrodynamics. And what we want to do is give a microscopic derivation of fluctuating hydrodynamics, much like or exactly like how it was done in fluid gravity correspondence. So we'll try to understand the CFT fluid from a gravitational uh, per- point of view provided by ADS-CFT. Uh, so there are two main difficulties if you try to approach this problem. One is a physical difficulty. It's a physical issue, as in physics issue, as in you have to identify the you have to identify the relevant low energy modes of the CFT. As in there are, if you start with a microscopic CFT, there are many CFT modes which relax fast because it's a CFT. They would relax over temperature time scale, and need not be and do not really are not relevant in the in the hydrodynamic limit. So our aim would be to first separate out these kind of physics where things decay fast and where things are long living like the fluid modes, and integrate out the fast modes. The second issue is a technical issue, where 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 we see that from the gravitational perspective, the fluctuations are uh, defined as the Hawking radiation coming out of the black hole. And and then if you want to approach fluctuating hydrodynamics from the bulk, you land on this issue that we don't know how to include, at least the conventional point of view. It's hard. It's not clear what is the correct boundary condition for Hawking radiations. Uh, as in, for to slightly explain that more, like at least when if you're doing a retarded response of this CFT fluid, we have this intuition that you can define the sources at the boundary, and what the relevant physics is of some causal evolution, and then you have an intuition that it should be it should give rise to some ingoing boundary conditions at the horizon of the black hole, and you can and extract various diffusion coefficients and so on. But for Hawking radiation, the issue is Hawking solutions or outgoing solutions uh, be, are not well behaved and near the horizon, event horizon. So this statement can be made very precise in if you're working in ingoing Edington Finkelstein coordinates, where you see that in the uh, ingoing modes are regular and outgoing modes are singular near the horizon. So I will talk in this talk. I will talk about how to resolve both these difficulties, as in how to identify like a clean and efficient way to identify and separate out fast and slow modes, and also some recent developments in real time, calculating real time correlators from ADS-CFT, where you can at least uh, at least up to all checks we have made, resolve this issue of including Hawking radiation. And so, so we will do that, and we will try to obtain a open local effective theory for the hydrodynamic modes of the CFT. So, are there any questions about that? So I'll move on. Uh, so I'll try to explain what are Schwinger-Keldysh path integrals. So, like I said, what we want to do is get a reduced density matrix for the fluid modes by integrating out some fast relaxing modes of the CFT. A convenient path integral method for this is available. It's called the Schwinger-Keldysh method, where you what you do is you extend the usual path integrals for evolution of some states, say some initial state to some final state, to some double path integral, which takes care of both the Ket and Bragg degrees of the density matrix independently. So, so say you had a unitary uh, evolution and you have an initial density matrix. Uh, you would imagine you can to calculate the evolution of density matrix. You can calculate all the transition amplitudes to all the future states and sum over them so that you square the amplitude and get the evolution of density matrix. So that can be implemented via path integral, whereas by a single path integral procedure. And so essentially, we have two factorized path integrals describing the evolution of both Ket degrees and Bragg degrees of the Hilbert space, uh, which I denote as right and left. Uh, and they are identified at some future time beyond interest, because you can act with operators on either Hilbert space and take a trace at the end to calculate relevant coordinates. And such a generating functional, uh, the generating functional for such strings of operators can be like is called the Schwinger-Keldysh generating functional, and it can be schematically written like this, where there's a evolution of the Ket space by some unitary of right sources, J rights, and evolution of the Bragg space by some unitary dagger of left sources. And so since we have a density matrix description, now we can integrate out some fast modes, which we will return to this point later. But so assuming we have identified the fast modes, we can integrate out the fast modes, and And integrating of degrees of freedom introduces right and left couplings in the Schwinger-Keldysh path. So, uh, so again, up to this point, we have independent evolutions of right and Ket and Rasp Hilbert spaces. But if you integrate out some degrees of freedom, that introduces additional right and left couplings. And so the reduced density metrics of some low energy observers uh, will have purely right. Uh, say if you have a Lagrangian perspective, Lagrangian description, you'll have purely right couplings, right terms in the action. There are purely left terms in the action, and there will be R, L, right and left coupled terms in the action, denoting that something has been integrated out. And this part of the mixed part of the action is called the influence phase, because it denotes that the open system which we are trying to describe is being influenced by some path. So, is there any question from that? Good. So I will move on. So, so Schwinger-Keldysh path integral can be alternatively thought of as a closed time contour evolution, where you start with some density matrix, which is some weighted sum over Ketz and Brass, and then you evolve and turn back after some future point, which is the future tracing we do, and complete the boundary conditions by arriving at the some initial Brass state. Uh, and for thermal states, you can replace the whole density matrix itself by a similar evolution along some Euclidean direction with I beta length. So say suppose now we take this perspective. So say we take this point of view for the Schwinger-Keldysh path. The natural question is what gravitational geometry reproduces this path and diagram? Because we know in ADS-CFT you have if a CFT lives on some manifold M, the gravitational dual uh, is is given by all the geometries which asymptote to M, right? So such a geometry, we would call such a geometry as a gravitational Schwinger-Keldysh saddle, the leading saddle of that such all those configurations. And I'll be trying to explain some recent developments in like correctly identifying this saddle. So is there any question from this part? Okay, we'll move on. So we know thermal CFT on a plane, like the one we are interested in, is dual to black plane backgrounds, and we now have the idea that what we are interested in is some modified black plane background which asymptotes to some this dual this double path integral for the CFT. And there is some long history of attempts to figure out what such a saddle should look, gravitational geometry should look like. And I'll explain a recent prescription by Glorioso, Crossley, and Liu, which which has which seems to have settled this issue. Uh, so let me explain what is Glorio CGL construction. Let me say prescription because it's a prescription which conjectured prescription which seems to work. Uh, the first step in CGL prescription is to study the black plane in ingoing Eddington-Finkelstein coordinates. Uh, so one advantage is that in this you clearly see that the ingoing solutions are well defined and regular at the horizon, and the outgoing solutions are singular. They as in they have a branch point at the horizon as functions of radial coordinate. And as a bonus, this makes the prescription applicable to dynamic situations such as a black hole formation via star collapse and so on. Uh, so this will be the first step in the story where you identify that the the Hawking or outgoing solutions are irregular, singular at the horizon. So the crux of this CGL prescription is that to resolve the singular behavior, we should lift the radial direction itself to a complex contour, uh, which which avoids the singularity and winds back. As in, usually you think of the radial coordinate as some open interval from the stretch horizon to the asymptotic boundary. But what GCL does is like they start from some slightly imaginary radial coordinate, uh, which avoids the so the picture here will be a time slice. The picture denotes a time slice of this geometry. So what they do is they start from a radial coordinate, which is slightly positive imaginary, and then as they approach the stretch horizon, they slightly go away into the complex, out of the real line, and then wind around and come back to some another asymptotic boundary where you have some slightly negative imaginary radial coordinate, and you end on some manifold defined as a complex radial contour with two asymptotic boundaries. And the and the claim is, uh, this if you proceed to start do usual ADS-CFT calculations by prescribing asymptotic boundary conditions, etc., with all the usual things like normalizable, non-normalizable, etc., and make sense of that the calculations in the usual way, this saddle can reproduce correct real-time coordinators with correct KMS structure and so on, at least in all the checks we have made. So the checks to count are like dynamics of some number code of string, plus it's some interactions up to Cortic order. So linearized plus up to Cortic order number code action, which reproduces the dynamics of some Brownian cork in the boundary, where you get consistent results up to for the so you can derive the non, so just like we are trying to do a fluctuating hydrodynamics derivation, you can derive the some non-linear Langevin equation for this number code of this string Brownian cork, and it seems to have the correct KMS relations and everything expected from field theory arguments. The second check is like a full Klein-Gordon plus general endpoint interactions, and which also reproduces some correct reproduces real-time coordinates correlators with correct KMS structures. And like there are then you can also derive fermionic KMS relations uh, with this kind of prescription in both the cases with chargeless black rings, uh, or vanishing chemical potential of the CFT, and charged black rings with some finite chemical potential.
I have a question,
Yes.
Akhil. This
Yeah.
prescription, is it tied to using infalling Eddington-Finkelstein coordinates?
Yes. So yeah, it is. Because you can see this, like I mean, what I'm describing is a particular time slice of the geometry, right?
Right.
And what you see is this analytical continuation apparently doesn't bring any complex shift to the time coordinates in either side of the geometry. So
Right.
so think of it from the field theory side. You would think, if you go along. So let me just. So okay. So here I have drawn a simple contour where like there is no complex part added. But if you have seen this complex contours people do for thermal states, you will go all the way to future, come back, and then go down in the imaginary direction, and then identify with the get, right?
Right.
So this prescription works in the very similar way that like if we compare among the two boundaries, there is no complex shift in the time itself, and uh, and all the complex shift happens via R. So now if I say, okay, let me apply the same prescription to some other time parameterization, but do give a same radial prescription as we have now, you will see that if you compare these two times, there will be a shift in the complex part of the time.
I see. Okay.
Sorry, I didn't understand, but shouldn't it be equivalent? I mean, if you were to use like some Kruskal coordinates and do this shift in, there's some notion of radial and time coordinates there as well, right? You can just, and if you were to, you can draw the
radial
same
coordinate in Kruskal coordinates. Sorry, say.
I mean, you can go to some t plus x, and I mean, you know what I'm saying, right?
The v and u.
Yeah, you can go to v and u, but then you can also go to t. Sorry, what is this? I'm not. I think somebody is not muted. Could you please? Yeah. Anyway, so once you go to Kruskal coordinates, you can also define a Kruskal time and a Kruskal x, which is v plus u and v minus u. The same. Okay. So and then that will give you, if you look at the black hole, it will give you a different slicing. So you could have done this, drawn this picture even in that slicing, right? This contour you have. In fact, you can take.
What I explained is, like, say I work with this prescription where there's a where there's a time.
I understood that the time was not shifted, and so it will look like there's a shift.
No. What the point was that if you use a different slice, you will get a different answer. If you use a different time and use the same radial prescription, you'll get a different answer. That was the point.
So you get different. Sorry, one second. If there's some general prescription for computing correlators, I'm confused about why it should rely on some specific choice of slicing. I can understand that there's in any choice of slicing there's
no. It's the point is not to land on some saddle with just two boundaries, right? So because in general, you would think that there is some general class of Schwinger-Keldysh path integrals where you choose to like add in some fraction of the density matrix in the future. This general sigma guys where the whole imaginary evolution is not done at the initial time, but future and so on, right? So I think what if you go to a different time slicing and do something like this, you will end up on something like that, where your whole density matrix is not together, but it's broken into some future density matrix and past density matrix.
Sorry, so is the statement then that this slicing relies on there being a particular killing isometry and only works when you can define some coordinate system? I mean, it sounds like a very
no.
In general,
any case with event horizon, you can define a ingoing Eddington-Finkelstein coordinates, right? So in that sense, it's not restricted. It's more more general.
I mean, if I take some black hole which has just been formed, then I mean there are many.
And after it rings down, say. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, no, I mean I'm confused. What you seem to be saying seems. I'm confused about this. The fact that it seems to be so tied to some choice of coordinates. I would be.
No, the statement is the ingoing coordinates is a natural coordinates, because in ingoing boundary conditions are manifest, and like.
Okay.
As in how do you say this? But is this part of the argument clear that, like, if you adopt a different time slice and use the same radial continuation, you will generate different correlators?
You'll generate different coordinates. It's not clear to me any answer will be different. In general, if you have a prescription, the expectation should be that as long as
there are different Schwinger real-time correlators, right? Which differ by, say, the kind of difference I mentioned, where you break the density matrix and put some part in the future, some part in the past.
Yeah, I can ensure that the asymptotic time is the same for all of these, right?
No, not exactly. That's what, like, say you start with in the upper boundary, like the R infinity plus epsilon boundary, you start with V coordinate, and you identify it with the short shell coordinate T. Now, in this prescription, I haven't changed the V time, but I have I have added something to the tortoise radius, because I can analytically continued, and my value of my tortoise coordinate will have a jump when I come to the second boundary. But now if I go back to the short shell time in the second boundary, it will have a shift, because it will absorb the shift from the jump in tortoise coordinate.
Okay.
So Subrat, okay, if I may make a comment, I think the statement here is that it's about what modes you continue analytically, and what modes you allow them to get a monodromy, right? And what this ingoing identification constraint does is that it continues ingoing solutions completely analytically. I think that's if you want a covariant invariance, coordinate invariant statement, I think that's a statement that you want a prescription that the ingoing solutions should be lifted analytically to the full contour.
Yeah, great. So then the way I would say it is that right next to the horizon, you can introduce a local UV coordinate system, and you can call that R and T or R star and T star. And in that local coordinate system, there's some clear notion of what are the right moving modes and what are the ingoing modes, and that doesn't rely on some global choice of Eddington-Finkelstein coordinates. It just relies on integrating the modes very, very close to the horizon. And there it's probably unambiguous which modes are parallel to the horizon, which are the ones I think which develop a monodromy, and which modes are ingoing into the horizon.
Right. So I would say you'll have to use the coordinate such that in this local coordinates, the ingoing modes are analytic and the outgoing modes are non-analytic. Though we haven't apart from some linearized calculations we do now, we haven't checked for dynamical situations.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Cool. So let me. Is there any other question? So let me go to the next section. So now we have kind of described what is the boundary path integral we are interested in, which is the evolution of density metrics from where you indicate out some fast modes. And now we have also explained what is the putative bulk description of the same path integral. And so now let's come to the second difficulty in including fluctuations, which is to understand how. Okay, the first difficulty in the understanding the fluctuations, fluctuating processes. Which sorry. Let me come. So in my motivation, I stated this as the first difficulty in coming to fluctuating hydrodynamics, which is identifying what are the slow and fast modes. So a crucial observation in this regard is that Maxwell and linearized Einstein perturbations can be reduced to a single family of scalar equations. So to see see what I mean by this, consider some deformed Klein-Gordon action, say S given by Sn, which is a usual Klein-Gordon del phi plus added with an r power n plus 1 minus d. So this might also sound like a very coordinate dependent thing. So I'm working with some ingoing coordinates, metric of the, let's say, metric of the usual Schwarzschild black brane, but written in ingoing coordinates. And the r is the radius in this setup. So you study this deformed Klein-Gordon metric where the action is r power some n plus 1 minus d times del phi. So n is really the subscript on the field here, and you should think of n as some integer values, n as some integer values. And example for this action, if you substitute n equal to d minus 1, which takes away that extra factor we added, reduces to a Klein-Gordon action. And in general, this action gives you some equation of motion like this, where we have defined some nice derivative combination d plus like this, and f is the blackening factor of the black hole. And the solutions of this equation will be denoted by some scalar plane wave, some Fourier coefficient along the plane of the black brane, and the claim is so the definition of phi n is that it solves this wave equation. Now the claim is this simple model of scalars captures both the effects we were talking about. Namely, there should be fast relaxing modes and there should be slow long-lived modes. So this action, if you consider n plus 1 such that n plus 1 is greater than 0, gives rise to solutions which are fast modes. So what I mean by that is that the non-normalizable, the ingoing modes of this solution will be non-normalizable, and if you switch, so hence if you switch off the non-normalizable modes, the ingoing modes immediately turn off. Maybe let me say it, like you solve this wave equation in a derivative expansion. You have a consistent derivative expansion to all orders, and if you switch off non-normalizable modes, it the more thing there are no more ingoing modes in the solution, which should be interpreted as that as you turn off sources, these modes switch off over beta time. And the normalizable outgoing modes. Okay, so all the outgoing modes of this solution will be normalizable. This should be interpreted as saying or the outgoing modes were fluctuation, Hawking radiation and fluctuations. Right? So this should be interpreted as saying all the boundary waves you calculate from this solution really correspond to fluctuations. There's no boundary fluid or slow long-lived modes corresponding to this kind of perturbations. They all any normalizable piece or wave in the boundary comes from fluctuations.
I have a question.
Yes.
I have a question, Akhil.
Yes.
So, where are the so-called quasi-normal modes?
The quasi-normal modes are the ingoing modes, right?
Are the ingoing? Yes. So these are the ones that are decaying in beta time.
These are the quasi-normal modes which decay in beta time.
Okay.
But that's not a generic description as we are coming to the next point. So for what I'm saying is the solutions for n plus 1 greater than 0 have quasi-normal modes which decay over beta time, and which are present in the geometry only if you add non-normalizable modes or sources in the CFT. So for is that clear? Sorry. Let me come to a second point. So it's
okay.
If you take n plus 1 less than 0, these modes, these solutions have long-lived modes. What I mean is, if they're at the leading order, their ingoing solutions are normalizable, and outgoing solutions are non-normalizable. And if you want to do a quasi-normal calculation, your only hope is that it picks up as you go higher up in the derivative expansion, you pick up some non-normalizable mode, and hence they will have. So let me say that again. So you have you have ingoing modes, which look like at leading order some 1 times some derivative times so on, and all the non-normalizable contributions to the solution can only come with derivatives in the derivatives in the plane directions. So what you see is if you arrange for the some derivative combination to vanish, there is a line of points in the frequency momentum space where you have ingoing solutions without any non-normalizable contribution to it. To put it simply, you can say there are ingoing solutions which are not turned off when you switch off all the non-normalizable modes in this for these modes. As in, if there are ingoing modes, non-zero ingoing modes in the CFT, the non-zero ingoing or dissipating modes in the CFT, which are present in the absence of any source. Like, so if you have a solution in the absence of any source, those are like real long-lived real fluctuations in the excitations in the CFT, and we can derive the dispersion for such modes, which I denote as some k minus n omega k to the 0. So let me before winding up the slide, let me say that there are there are two kind of modes again. one for n plus 1 greater than 0, the fast modes, which we call as the Markovian scalars, because the operators dual to these modes are like fast relaxing. So if you switch off the source for these modes, they turn off very fast in order beta time. And then there are non-Markovian scalars, which are long-lived excitations, correspond to n plus 1 less than 0, for which even if you turn off the sources, there can be non-vanishing excitations or some physical zero mode. Is that clear? Sorry, Spenta, maybe can you, if it's not clear, could you ask a question?
No, I think it's fine. Actually, please go
Thank
ahead.
you.
Yeah.
So let us come to why this is relevant for the Maxwell and Einstein perturbations. So before that, let me flash some results. So we have these solutions and dispersions, etc., calculated up to some third order interrogative order. So I'll just flash some sample result. So you have this is the dispersion for a k minus n equal to 0 is the dispersion for a general non-Markovian mode, which you can see has a diffusive behavior at leading order, which is I omega plus some k square equal to 0. And so, and then you can calculate all the coefficients up to third order. I've given all the results to second order in this. Yeah. So let us come to why these scalar solutions are relevant for Maxwell and Einstein solutions. Perturbations of Maxwell and Einstein equations. So the claim is like this is a valid Maxwell solution. What I have on screen is a valid Maxwell solution. But let me explain the symbols here once more. So you have S, which is some scalar harmonic or scalar plane wave, to be precise, and D plus is some mixed derivative we defined in this slide, the fifth point in this slide. If I do this, is my cursor visible?
Yeah, it's visible.
Oh, okay, cool. Okay, sorry. I see. So S is some scalar plane wave. D plus is the derivative we defined in last section, and we have a phi 3 minus D coefficient here, which is the non-Markovian scalar, and then we have a different sector of the solution where there's a Markovian scalar and some VIAs, VI alphas, which are transverse vector planes. And you can count how many such modes are there. So there is some NB equal to D minus 2 number of vector plane waves. So let's discuss what are these modes physically. So phi D minus 3, or the Markovian part of the solution, are radially infalling waves polarized along the plane. Because sorry, phi D minus 3, sorry, I pointed the wrong thing, I guess. Phi D minus 3, or the vector part of the solution, are radially infalling waves polarized along the plane. And they are Markovian, they relax over order beta time scale. In the other way to look at it, like if you switch off the non-normalizable mode, these ingoing modes are also turned off. They are dual to some circulating eddy currents, which if you turn off a magnetic field, which die down really fast, which like the kind of guys which make possible the magnetic brakes or something, they dissipate or in order beta time. And phi 3 minus D are really polarized, grazing the black wave. Phi 3 minus D was a non-Markovian scalar, which means it's long-lived. It has a diffusion. It has a Monschel equation, which is a diffusion equation, and these are dual to diffusing charge density modes of the CFD. So is that clear? Okay. let me go on to the next slide. So there's a similar statement in the Einstein equation, Einstein for the solutions of linearized Einstein equations too. So let me start with this phi 1 minus t. Sorry, maybe I'll start with the phi d minus 1. Phi d minus 1 is the is a tensor sector of perturbations, and these are some tensor plane waves with some transverse tensor plane waves with some symmetric condition, tracelessness and divergence lessons and so on. We can count how many of them, and there are d minus 3 of these modes, and they like the real as many as the real gravitons in the boundary would be, and these guys are again Markovian. They are infalling gravitons polarized along the plane, and if you turn off this source, they will decay with they will it will also switch off these modes immediately, and they will decay over beta time. Uh, uh, the vector part of the solution given by the second term uh, is a non-Markovian solution. These are gravitons which are grazing the black brane, and they are long-lived. Since it's a non-Markovian mode, they also satisfy a diffusion equation and are dual to the shear modes in the fluid, which diffuse momentum along in the directions perpendicular to vi. And there's an S, which is some scalar sector of perturbations in the gravity, which we are not talking about in this talk. So S should correspond to sound modes, and they are qualitatively very different from the diffusive modes we have in this non-Markovian sector of scalars, because they have linear dispersion, etc. So this is for future work. Is there any questions on this? Okay, so I think I'll conclude. First of all, the conclusion is there's a way to separate out the long-lived and short-lived modes in the black brane, and there is a generalized scalar field which captures all these different cases. There are short-lived Markovian scalars which dissipate fast, gives local open field theories if you integrate them out. And examples are the usual Klein-Gordon scalar whose quasi-normal modes decay with order beta time. Circulating parts of the boundary currents or the eddy currents, or radially infalling gravitons, which are dual to tensor plane wave perturbations of the boundary metric. And there's a second sector of non-Markovian scalars, which are dual to hydrodynamic modes. They should be kept part of the FT theory, and you can't integrate them out, because if there's there are long-lived modes for them when the dispersion relation is satisfied. So these are dual to diffusing conserved currents and tangential gravitons, which tangentially moving gravitons on the black brane, which are dual to the shear modes in the fluid. So let me also talk about some future directions. So the real check of these things and real use of these things is when we go beyond the quadratic order, where you include the effects of nonlinear terms in the bulk action, and then you calculate the interactions of all these various modes. So you should be able to calculate effects such as how the ingoing modes and the outgoing Hawking modes scatter off each other, and equivalently in the boundary, you will have effects where some dissipative mode and some dissipating process and some fluctuating process scatter off, as in they interact and affect each other and so on. So and that's precisely or like in a technical term, you'll have access to higher endpoint real-time correlators in the fluid, and which encodes like nonlinear dissipations and nonlinear noise and so on. And so that's where we are headed to with towards fluctuating hydrodynamics. Thank you. I'll stop here.
Okay, so let's thank Akhil for that wonderful talk. If anyone has any questions, you may ask.
Can you, Akhil, can you say something about a few words about how you go about solving these differential equations with this complex contour in the bulk?
Oh, it's actually straightforward. Like so first of all, we are solving in some derivative expansion. So
Right.
you can solve order by order, and the point is like for most part of the calculation, the fact that there is a complex contour is not important, because so we have a prescription to do this, like in a very effective manner, which is that you just go about calculating the ingoing modes as you usually do in a single copy, in a real-time calculation with a single copy blackplane, and then there's a so we have a prescription then, provided you have the ingoing solution, uh, which by definition is regular at the horizon. So which means that in this on the contour, these solutions will be analytic at the horizon. There's a prescription to time reverse the solution and obtain outgoing solutions. So the prescription we have for time reversing manifestly shows that the ingoing solutions, provided you have analytic ingoing solutions, analytic in the sense, you get outgoing solutions which have a branch cut, and then it's just a matter of like adding these two solutions which satisfy the asymptotic boundary conditions. So if you're worried about the complex contour part, it for most part of the calculation, it doesn't matter. For instance, if you can take any ingoing solution, derivative expanded solution, or I mean in general, like any ingoing solution, even not derivative expanded, available in any of the papers in the fluid gravity literature, and just time reverse, obtain Hawking radiation, and write a general outgoing solution which depends only on the data at the asymptotics.
Nice.
So is there any other question?
So let me ask, I mean, so the value of this type of analytic continuation is just to be able to get at the correct Hawking modes by
Right. What is the right? So what is the number of Hawking modes you have to include per ingoing mode to generate correlators with the correct KMS structure?
Okay.
You can phrase this as something like that, and then you have a natural way to interpret that completely as asymptotic data, provided you have two asymptotics.
Okay. Thank you.
That's the value of this prescription.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add a comment that, you have to do the time reversal, but the time reversal is better done in some gauges, where the time reversal is more easier in some gauges. So better to choose in particular, radial gauge is not a good gauge, but the gauge that Akhil has presented is it's a better way of doing it. It's a time reversal invariant gauge where this time reversal can be done easier.
Like as a related statement, like part of the advantage with going to a fully scalar classification of scalar field classification of these Maxwell and Einstein equations is that once you go to that, it's many of these gauge ambiguities and many of these ambiguities with time reversing tensor fields and so on go away. So you can completely work with scalar solutions, and then substitute that scalar equation in the solution in the answers, and figure out the solution for Einstein and Maxwell equations. Of course, this answers itself, as you can see, is a gauge dependent statement, because I mean a general vector would have had also a mode where some del is times dxi kind of perturbation is present. So we have switched off those guys. That's a gauge choice here. So are there questions? Any more questions?
So in this way, you very nicely get a thermal spectrum, I suppose. You haven't discussed all that, but you know, the Hawking radiation has a black body spectrum, right?
Mm-hmm.
You get some
Right. Yeah,
That's true.
you get a thermal spectrum, as which you can see from the. So you can calculate real-time correlators. So usually how you do is you calculate some in this one copy conventional calculation, you calculate a retarded correlator, and then from that you obtain the advanced stand and the spectral function.
Right.
But this calculation at a go gives you a retarded, advanced, and spectral function piece, which is all consistent.
Yes. Okay. Good. Thank you.
Yeah. Sure.
Okay. Any more questions? Okay. If not, let's thank Akhil again, and we'll see you guys next time.
Okay. Thank you guys for coming.
Thanks.
Thanks again.